What is the purpose of a revocable living trust? This is vitally important that you know about this so that you can make the best decision for taking care of your family. By the end of this video, you'll know the primary purpose of a revocable living trust and why you'll want one. You'll see how a revocable living trust takes care of assets upon your death. You'll learn the function of a trust and how it helps you to provide security. I'll show you how a trust can provide you with maximum flexibility. We'll cover exactly how a trust avoids probate and why it's so important that you do so. You'll understand why the wealthy use trust to plan for their estates and why you need to do the exact same thing. Now, at the end of this video, I've got a free gift for you that you're going to want to take advantage of. Also, take some time right now to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because we've got so much more valuable information you need to know about. All right, let's take a look at the purpose of a revocable living trust. Well, the primary purpose is to provide us with an estate plan. Simply put, a plan for our estate. You know, I tell people all the time, everyone has an estate. And for whatever reason, that's something that people just are unfamiliar with. And I think it's partly because of the word estate. Sometimes people hear that word and they think about, it's got to be millions of dollars, and if I'm not there, then I don't have an estate, and as a result, I don't need a plan for that estate. Well, let me tell you something, nothing could be further from the truth. Everyone has an estate. As a result of that, everyone needs a plan for their estate. In this video, I'm going to share with you why you need a trust. Because the primary purpose of that is going to be to avoid probate. We'll talk about that in particular, but let's first of all understand that you need a plan for your estate, and a trust is a great way to do that. Now, with that estate plan, basically the trust facilitates the transfer of assets upon your death. I know facilitate sounds like a fancy word there, but basically it takes care of the transfer of your assets to whoever you want to leave those assets to. One of the great things I like about an estate is that basically the assets are held in trust for the beneficiary. Now, that beneficiary could be your children, it could be grandchildren, it could be friends, family, it can be organizations, it could be your church. Whatever this is set up to accomplish, the trust basically holds those assets for the benefit of those beneficiaries. Now, one of the things that I love about a trust being able to help facilitate that transfer is that when it holds those assets, basically it can hold those and those assets can be invested, those assets can be, basically do with them as you please or at the trustee's discretion. We're going to talk about that in just a moment as well, but I want to make sure that you understand this trust is a holding vessel. Now, if your kids are not old enough to gain access to those assets, the trustee will manage those trust assets until they are at that point where you want them to receive them. Now, I said not old enough. You may say that I want them to receive things according to a distribution schedule. For instance, you may say I want them to receive a third of their estate at 25, a third at 30, a third at 35. So that provides those incremental periods for them to adapt rather than receiving a bulk sum all at once that maybe they're ill-equipped to handle. This way it kind of eases them into it. Also, it's important to note that the trustee can determine whether or not they receive assets, not outright, but maybe that pays their reasonable expenses. This is why choosing your trustee is going to be very important, which is definitely a point that we need to talk about. But before we do that, I want to talk about the flexibility involved with a trust. In the event that you need to change something, we talked about a revocable living trust. Basically, that means you can make changes to this, you can completely revoke it, you can put assets in, you can take assets out. That's a little bit different than other types of trusts that may be irrevocable or irrevocable. Now, when we talk about this revocable living trust, the primary purpose, again, is to avoid probate. We're going to hold those assets in that trust for the benefit of whomever we're leaving this to, whether it's our children, our grandchildren, family members, friends, as I mentioned, organizations, churches, charities, whoever you want to leave this to. Remember, it's your estate. This is the plan for your estate. How do you want that to be transferred whenever you've passed away? Now, something I always ask when I'm speaking to groups at events or even with clients, I say, have you had any experience with a trust, or have you had any experience with an estate plan, or how you receive different assets? I always look for feedback there, and share with us some feedback right now. If in the comments section, put your experience. Have you had a trust? Do you have a trust? What's been your experience with that? Have you been concerned or really confused about trust, put that in there just to kind of get some engagement with us. Okay, so we've talked about the primary purpose of a revocable living trust is to provide for an estate plan, how our assets will be transferred whenever we pass away, and how that will take place. Primary objective of a living trust is to avoid probate. And when we talk about avoiding probate, that's really what we're trying to accomplish. Obviously, we want to accomplish our estate plan objectives, but another byproduct, if you will, of having a revocable living trust is that it avoids probate. Now, when it comes to probate, basically that is the government's involvement, court supervision of the transfer of your assets. Well, the great thing about a revocable living trust is that your assets are transferred out of your name into the name of the trust during your lifetime while you are living. That's why it's called a living trust. All the transfer occurs before you've passed away, so there's nothing for the court to supervise. That's one of the tremendous benefits of being able to avoid the probate process, and it's one of the things that you definitely want to consider when you're putting your estate plan together. Now, part of the reason for that is that whenever we have the government involved, we also have a couple other things involved. One is that we know it's going to take a lot of time, and number two, it's going to cost us a lot of money. Now, when I say a lot of time, I've seen studies that have said that probate can take on average between 11 and 14 months. Obviously, when we say on average, there are some that take more than that, and in fairness, there are some that are less than that. I don't know about you, but 11 to 14 months sounds like an excessive amount of time. Now, even I had one time I was speaking to a group of people, and I had a gentleman that said, well, I'm not sure where you get your numbers. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, my mom's estate went through probate and it only took 6 months. Wow, wasn't that expeditious? Well, the reality is, even if it took 6 months, that's a lot of time for the government to be involved before your family is going to gain access to those assets. It's ridiculous. Now, at the same time, I've heard stories about how probate has lasted decades. Well, obviously, that's kind of the horror story. We want to make sure that your assets are transferred on your timetable, not the government's. But then that second point that I mentioned, the cost. They're going to have court costs, we're going to have administrative fees, we're going to have attorney fees, accounting fees, appraisal fees for your different assets. And then guess what? If you own assets in more than one state, you're going to have to go through probate in more than one state. It's called ancillary probate. And you want to keep that from happening. Now, another great benefit of avoiding the probate process is that it keeps your estate out of the public record. Now, if you're like most people, you don't want your estate and how it's going to be distributed, to whom it's going to be distributed, something that people can just look up and find all about. Well, you've got to keep that out of the public record to keep that from happening. Probate is a matter of public record. It's another reason why we want to avoid this. Sometimes people think, man, you just really don't like the government. I say, no, actually, I love the government. Because you know what? The government set all of these laws in place that allow us to avoid the probate process. It's up to us to take advantage of them. You see, we couldn't do any of this without the law. Everything that we're doing is 100% legal and 100% authorized by the government. The beauty of this is that they have made all of these benefits available to us, but it's only available to those people that take action, that do something about it. You've got to set up a revocable living trust for your estate plan and make sure that you avoid the probate process. Now, another great benefit of having a revocable living trust is that it separates the ownership of the assets. And let me explain what I mean by that. Now, when you set up your trust, basically you are the trustor, meaning the person that established it, and in most instances, you'll also be the trustee, the person that's managing it. And then you'll name beneficiaries, that's the people that are going to receive your assets whenever you pass away. But for those people that are going to receive your assets, this can provide great protection because you can put restrictions in place. For instance, I mentioned earlier that you can have a distribution schedule that says maybe they receive your assets a third at 25, a third at 30, a third at 35. Well, you can also have something in there that while the assets are held in the trust, there is maybe a spendthrift provision that makes sure that they can't gain access to this unless the trustee authorizes it because they're ill-equipped to do so. Maybe they've demonstrated that they're not good with money, and you want to have some restrictions to make sure that it's not all squandered. At the same time, you may have some concerns over lawsuits, and you probably should, because lawsuits are just a fact of our society, is something that happens. Well, one lawsuit that most people don't think about is a divorce. What if one of your children is involved in a divorce and you're worried about maybe that ex-spouse receiving your assets? Well, one of the great things about a trust arrangement is that you have the ability to put restrictions in place that has that creditor protection. So then you're not worried about that. It's something that people ask me about all the time. Obviously, we hope our kids don't get involved in anything like that, but hey, statistics show us that it's entirely possible, if not probable. As a result, we've got to protect against that. A trust can help you immensely when it comes to this. One thing I want to make sure that you are especially mindful of is, what are you leaving for your family? And I'm not talking about assets. I'm talking about what type of legacy are you leaving? How do you want to be remembered? Because, there are so many things that are more valuable than money. There are lessons that can be left. There are things that you may want to share. Maybe your financial philosophy. How is it that you built your overall estate? What would you want to share with them? When the time comes that they need to have this information, one of the things that I always put as part of my trust is what I call my legacy organizer. And it's a place where you can include information about how you built your fortune. And when I say fortune, whatever you have, that's your fortune. It needs to be left, and there's so much more than just that money. You need to leave behind that legacy. That's one of the great things about an estate plan, one of the great things about a revocable living trust. Maybe you've got a family constitution. Maybe you've got something more formal. Well, this can all be included and accomplished as part of this revocable trust. I covered this and so many more details and strategies and just things that you need to know about in a mini course that I created called Enlightened Estate Planning. I got a special benefit for you. You now have access to that. Oh, and by the way, you have free access to that. Thanks so much for watching this. That's why I want to give you a special gift to reward you for doing so. All you have to do is click the link below and you will be granted access to this free Enlightened Estate Planning course where I cover amazing strategies that you need to know about to take care of your family. Click that link below and access that mini course free of charge. I'm JJ Childers. Thanks so much for watching.